Woman Who Was Too Calm title. He was just a single dad, until this flight changed everything setting. Chicago right arrow, Denver, night flight, winter storm approaching. Daniel Brooks hated airports for one simple reason. They were full of goodbyes. He stood near gate B-17 at O'Hare with a backpack on one shoulder and a small pink suitcase rolling behind his daughter. Emily, 8 years old, wore a puffy jacket 2 sizes too big and held a toy airplane like it was a shield. "Dad," she said, staring at the plane through the glass, "what if it shakes again?" Daniel crouched so his eyes were level with hers. He forced a calm smile, the kind parents learn to fake when they don't have a choice. "Planes shake sometimes," he said, "like a car on a bumpy road." Emily's grip tightened on the toy. "But last time it didn't stop shaking." Daniel's throat closed up for half a second. Last time, he didn't correct her. He didn't explain turbulence. He didn't tell her how the reports used words like unexpected, rare, and unavoidable. Words that sounded clean and professional on paper, but didn't mean anything when you were the one living the nightmare. He simply said, "This time I'm right here." Emily searched his face as if she could tell whether he meant it. Daniel did mean it. He just wasn't sure the universe cared. Their flight was delayed twice. The storm over the Midwest was crawling in like a slow, hungry animal. Around them, people complained into phones, scrolled through news, bought overpriced coffee. A businessman in a Navy suit argued with a gate agent. A couple took selfies like this was vacation. A tired mother bounced a baby on her hip. Normal. Daniel wanted normal. A voice cracked over the speakers. "Flight 417 to Denver is now boarding Group C." Emily's shoulders rose. Daniel took her hand. "Okay, kiddo, we're gonna do this." As they got in line, Emily whispered, "Do you think Mom can see us from heaven?" Daniel paused. Airports were full of goodbyes, but that question was the one goodbye he never learned how to survive. He kept walking because stopping would break him. "I think," he said quietly, "that moms like yours don't miss anything." Emily nodded like that was enough. Sometimes kids accept answers because they need to. Adults reject answers because they know too much. Inside the aircraft, the air smelled like recycled oxygen and faint perfume. People shuffled down the aisle searching for their row numbers like they were hunting for shelter. Daniel checked their boarding passes. 24A and 24 billion, window and middle. Good. He liked the window because Emily could watch the lights and he could control what she saw. Control mattered. It was the only thing that made him feel like he wasn't helpless. Emily climbed into the window seat and pressed her forehead against the glass. "It's so dark." Daniel buckled his seatbelt and looked down the aisle. The overhead bins slammed. The flight attendants moved with practiced smiles. That's the thing about a plane. It looks safe because everyone acts like it's safe. Then the woman stepped into their row. She wasn't flashy. No heels, no designer bag. Just jeans, sneakers, and a gray hoodie pulled low like she didn't want anyone to remember her face. She carried one small backpack and nothing else. But what made Daniel notice her wasn't what she wore. It was how she moved. She didn't stumble like a tired traveler. She didn't smile at strangers or apologize for bumping a shoulder. She navigated the aisle like she'd already measured it. Her eyes flicked over faces, quick, efficient, like she was counting. She reached their row. "Excuse me," she said, voice calm, American accent clean and steady. "I'm 24C." Emily turned. "Hi." The woman's expression softened for half a second, then returned to neutral. She slid into the aisle seat and buckled without wasting motion. Daniel nodded politely. "Hey, hi." She didn't offer her name. Emily leaned toward Daniel and whispered loud enough that the woman definitely heard, "Dad, she looks like a secret agent." Daniel tried not to laugh. "Emily," the woman's lips twitched. "I'm not." Emily didn't buy it. "Are you a police officer?" The woman met Emily's eyes. There was something warm there, but controlled, like kindness under armor. "Something like that," she said, then added, "but tonight I'm just a passenger." Emily brightened. "Okay, I'm Emily. That's my dad, Daniel." The woman hesitated, just a fraction. "Nice to meet you, Emily." Then she looked at Daniel. "Hello." Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest, like his body recognized danger before his brain could name it. "Hi," he said again, slower this time. The woman glanced at Emily's toy airplane. "That's a good one." Emily smiled proudly. "It flies really far, like forever." Daniel swallowed. Forever was a word he avoided. The doors closed. The safety video played. Daniel watched the woman more than the screen. Her hands rested on her thighs still. She didn't look bored or distracted. She watched the aisle, the front, the exits. When the captain mentioned turbulence, her gaze sharpened, not with fear, but with calculation. Daniel told himself to relax. Maybe she was nervous in her own way. Maybe he was projecting because trauma turns ordinary things into warnings. But then she did something that made his stomach tighten. She checked the seatbelt sign before it even turned on. Like she knew. The plane pushed back from the gate, turning slowly onto the taxiway. Through the window, Chicago glowed like a distant city underwater, blurred by rain. Emily pressed her palm against the glass. Daniel placed his hand over hers. "Deep breaths, okay?" Emily inhaled, exhaled, tried to smile. The engines roared, they took off. For a moment, everything was smooth. Daniel's shoulders dropped. His brain tried to believe. Then the plane hit the cloud layer. The world outside vanished into black and gray. The wings disappeared, replaced by sudden flashes of lightning far away like silent camera bulbs. The aircraft shuddered. Emily's eyes went wide. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand. "It's okay, it's okay." The seatbelt sign pinged. Daniel expected the woman to flinch. She didn't. She simply looked down the aisle again, then toward the front, then to the row behind them like she was tracking movement. Emily noticed. "You're not scared." The woman replied softly, "I respect turbulence. I don't fear it." Emily whispered, "My dad fears it." Daniel forced a chuckle. "Emily," the woman's eyes moved to Daniel, and the kindness in them turned, understanding. Like she could see straight through his jokes into the bruises underneath. "I'm sorry," she said, quiet enough that Emily couldn't hear clearly, "about whatever happened to you." Daniel's heart stopped. He stared at her. "Excuse me?" She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She just looked forward again like she'd said too much. Daniel's mind raced. How would she know had he reacted that obviously? Or was she the kind of person who read people like files? A chill crawled up his arms that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The plane steadied. The seatbelt sign stayed on. People relaxed a little, pulling out snacks, adjusting pillows. A flight attendant pushed a cart down the aisle. The cabin filled with the normal sounds of flight, rappers, murmured conversations, a baby fussing somewhere. Daniel tried to breathe. Then Emily's voice cut through his thoughts. "Dad, can I go to the bathroom?" Daniel looked at the seatbelt sign. "Not yet, sweetie, it's still on." Emily pouted. "But I really have to go." The woman glanced down, then to Daniel, then to Emily. "There's a bathroom in the back that's usually less crowded." Daniel blinked. "How do you know? Frequent flyer," she said quickly. But her eyes were already on the aisle again, like she was expecting something. Daniel felt it. That same pressure in the air you feel before a fight. He leaned closer. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated, a beat too long. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah what?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "Sarah Miller." Daniel studied her face for any crack. "Okay," he said. "Sarah Miller." Emily smiled. "Hi, Sarah Miller." Sarah nodded politely. "Hi." Another announcement snapped through the speakers. The captain's voice sounded calm, practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hargrove. We're going to be moving around some weather for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Nothing to worry about. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Daniel heard the phrase, nothing to worry about, and felt the opposite. Emily looked at him. Did you hear that? Nothing to worry about. Daniel forced a smile. Yep. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't look reassured. She looked alert. Daniel watched her hands, not trembling, not sweating, still steady. This wasn't just a calm person. This was a trained person. The turbulence returned, worse. The plane dipped, then rose. A few people yelped. Drinks rattled in cups. Overhead bins creaked. Emily squeezed Daniel's fingers until it hurt. Daniel whispered, "Look at me, Em. Look at my eyes. Breathe with me." Emily tried. Her lip trembled. Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out a sealed packet, an extra blanket, the airline kind, unopened. She offered it to Emily. Emily blinked. "For me," Sarah nodded. "Wrap it around your shoulders. It helps you feel held." Emily took it like it was a gift from God. Daniel stared at the blanket. "Where did you get that?" Sarah didn't look at him. "I asked for it." "Why would you?" "Because," she said quietly, "kids shouldn't feel alone in the air." Daniel's chest tightened in a way he didn't expect. He wanted to thank her. He also wanted to ask 100 questions. But the turbulence stole the moment. The plane jolted hard enough that a man across the aisle cursed loudly. Emily gasped. Daniel braced. Sarah's gaze locked on a point up the aisle, someone walking. But who would be walking with the seatbelt sign on? Daniel twisted his neck. A man in a dark jacket was moving toward the front, one hand on the seatbacks for balance. He didn't look panicked. He looked determined. A flight attendant called out, "Sir, please return to your seat." The man didn't stop. Sarah's body shifted subtly, like a spring compressing. Daniel heard his own heartbeat. The man reached the front curtain near first class. And in that instant, a sound came from the cockpit door, metal on metal, like something being tested. Not a bang, a deliberate click. Emily whispered, "Daddy, what's he doing?" Daniel didn't know, but Sarah did. Because she leaned toward Daniel, voice low as thunder. "Listen to me," she said. "Keep your daughter close. Stay seated. No matter what you hear next, do not panic." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Sarah, what is happening?" Sarah's eyes stayed forward. "Just trust me." Daniel wanted to argue, then the plane dropped, not a normal dip. A sudden, stomach-lurching fall that made the entire cabin scream. The lights flickered. Emily cried out, grabbing Daniel's arm. Daniel pulled her into his chest. A flight attendant shouted, "Everyone stay seated." Somewhere, a bag fell from an overhead bin. Then the intercom crackled again, this time not the captain's smooth voice, but a strained, clipped tone from the cockpit. "Cabin crew to the front, now." The words were not part of a normal script. They were not calm. They were a warning. Sarah's expression hardened. Daniel felt the old terror rising, hot, sharp, familiar. Emily sobbed into his jacket. "Dad, are we going to die?" Daniel's eyes burned. He couldn't say no, not confidently, not honestly. All he could do was hold her tighter and whisper, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." Sarah looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, her calm cracked just enough for Daniel to see the truth underneath. This wasn't only weather. This was something else. And Sarah Miller wasn't something like a police officer. She was the reason this flight might survive. Or the reason it might not. The plane shuddered again, the cabin filled with fear. And Daniel realized something that made his blood run cold. The storm outside was not the biggest danger tonight. The danger was already on board. The passenger who wasn't supposed to be here, the screaming didn't stop immediately. That was the worst part. After the sudden drop, the cabin stayed suspended in fear, like everyone was waiting for the plane to either recover or fall apart completely. Luggage rattled, someone was praying out loud, a child cried somewhere behind them. Daniel felt Emily shaking against his chest. He pressed his chin to the top of her head. "I've got you. I've got you." He said it over and over like repetition could turn it into armor. The plane leveled out, but the seatbelt sign stayed on, glowing an angry red. The captain didn't speak again. That silence was louder than any announcement. Daniel lifted his head and looked at Sarah. She was no longer pretending. Her body was angled toward the aisle, one hand gripping the armrest, the other resting near her jacket pocket like she was measuring distance, timing, risk. Her eyes followed the movement of the flight attendants as they hurried toward the front. "Sarah," Daniel whispered, "you said don't panic, but I need to know what's happening." Sarah didn't answer right away. She waited until the cabin noise softened, until fear turned into a low, constant hum. Then she leaned close enough that only he could hear. "There's a man on this plane," she said, "who does not exist on the passenger manifest." Daniel blinked. "That doesn't make sense." "It does if someone wants to move without being tracked." Daniel's mouth went dry. "You're saying—" "I'm saying this flight wasn't just unlucky." Emily lifted her head slightly. "Dad," Daniel forced a smile for her. "Hey, you okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. Is she really a police officer?" Sarah looked at Emily, then back at Daniel. "I work for the Transportation Security Administration," Sarah said carefully. "Air Security Division." Emily frowned. "What's that?" Sarah softened her voice. "It means I help keep people safe on planes." Emily thought about that, then she wrapped her arms around Daniel again. "Okay, kids were strange like that. Give them a simple truth and they could survive almost anything. Daniel wasn't a kid, he needed details." "You're undercover," he said quietly. "Yes. And that man was flagged earlier today at O'Hare," Sarah finished. "We lost him in the crowd. He wasn't supposed to make this flight." Daniel's heart pounded. "But he did." "Yes." The realization settled heavy in Daniel's chest. This wasn't random. This was targeted. The cabin lights flickered again, not off, just enough to remind everyone how fragile everything was. A flight attendant rushed past them, face pale, whispering urgently into a handset. Sarah watched her go. "Whatever he's planning," Sarah said, "it's already started." 10 rows back, a man collapsed. At first, people thought it was fear or a heart attack. Someone shouted for help. A woman screamed his name. Another passenger waved frantically for a flight attendant. Daniel saw the man's body convulse, not violently, but wrong, like his muscles were fighting commands they didn't understand. Sarah stood up immediately. "Stay here," she told Daniel. "Do not move." "Sarah," she was already in the aisle. Daniel watched her move down the plane with controlled urgency, flashing a badge to the nearest flight attendant so quickly Daniel barely saw it. Passengers leaned into the aisle, trying to see. Emily clutched Daniel's jacket. "Dad, what's happening?" Daniel swallowed. "Someone's sick." That was a lie, and both of them knew it. Sarah knelt beside the collapsed man. A flight attendant handed her a medical kit. Sarah didn't open it. She grabbed the man's wrist, not for his pulse, but to flip his sleeve. Daniel saw it from his seat, a thin wire, barely visible. Sarah's jaw tightened. She looked up at the flight attendant. "Get the captain now." The attendant hesitated. "Ma'am, now." The authority in Sarah's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. The attendant ran. Passengers murmured. Phones came out despite announcements. Fear spread faster than facts. Daniel felt like the walls were closing in. A man across the aisle leaned over. "What's going on?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know." That was the truth. Sarah pressed 2 fingers against the collapsed man's neck again. He was breathing, barely. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, something Daniel didn't recognize. She scanned the man's chest. The device beeped softly. Sarah cursed under her breath. Daniel's stomach sank. Minutes later, the captain's voice returned, but it wasn't broadcast to the whole cabin. The cockpit door opened just enough for a tense exchange. A senior flight attendant stood guard. Sarah stood blocking the aisle. Daniel couldn't hear what was said, but he saw Sarah's shoulders stiffen. He saw her nod once, and he saw fear, real fear, flash across her face before it vanished behind professionalism. She walked back to her seat. Daniel didn't wait. "What?" he asked. "Tell me." Sarah sat down, exhaled slowly, and looked at Emily first. "Hey," she said gently, "can you put your headphones on for a minute?" Emily hesitated. "Why, so you don't hear boring adult stuff." Emily considered this, then nodded and slipped the headphones over her ears, turning on a cartoon she barely watched. Sarah leaned in. "That man isn't the primary threat," she said. Daniel stared at her. Then who is? Sarah's eyes flicked toward the front of the cabin. The one who walked toward the cockpit earlier. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. What does he want? Sarah chose her words carefully. He wants to see how fast panic spreads. Daniel frowned. That's it. No, she said. That's step one. The plane hit turbulence again, lighter this time, but enough to keep nerves raw. Sarah continued, voice low. There's a method some groups use, she said. They test security responses on domestic flights, no hijacking, no explosion, just stress. Daniel felt sick. You're saying we're a test run? Yes. For what? For how long it takes before people stop listening to the crew. Daniel glanced around the cabin. Passengers whispered. Some stood despite the seatbelt sign. A man argued with a flight attendant near the back. Fear was already winning. And the wire? Daniel asked. Distraction, Sarah said. He triggered a medical emergency to pull resources away from the cockpit. Daniel's chest tightened. What happens next? Sarah met his eyes. That depends on how far they're willing to go. Emily tugged at Daniel's sleeve, pulling one headphone off. Dad, why are people standing up? Daniel forced calm into his voice. They're just nervous. Sarah leaned closer to Emily. Hey, Emily. Emily looked at her. Yeah, you're doing really well, Sarah said. I need you to help me with something important. Emily straightened. Okay. Stay buckled, Sarah said. And if anyone comes near your row who isn't wearing a uniform, you tell your dad immediately. Deal? Emily nodded seriously. Deal, Daniel stared at Sarah. You're involving her. I'm empowering her, Sarah corrected. Fear is worse when kids feel useless. Daniel couldn't argue with that. He'd lived it. Another announcement crackled through the speakers. This time the captain sounded different. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to remain at our current altitude longer than expected. Please stay seated. The wording was off. Daniel noticed. So did Sarah. He's pushing them, Sarah muttered. Who? The man in front. He wants escalation. Daniel clenched his fists. Why not land? Because landing early means answers, Sarah said, and whoever's behind this wants questions delayed. A flight attendant hurried past again, whispering urgently into the handset. Sarah stood halfway, then sat back down. Not yet, she said to herself. Daniel watched her, trying to reconcile the calm woman who'd offered a blanket with the agent now calculating threats in real time. You're very composed, he said quietly. How do you do that? Sarah didn't look at him. You learn to function while you're scared. Daniel laughed bitterly. That sounds familiar, she glanced at him. You lost someone on a flight. It wasn't a question. Daniel stiffened. How do you know that? Sarah hesitated. Because, she said slowly, you react the way survivors do. You don't panic loudly, you panic inward. Daniel looked away. My wife, he said. 8 years ago, turbulence, mechanical failure. The report said no one could have done anything. Sarah nodded. I'm sorry. Daniel swallowed. So am I. For a moment, the chaos around them faded. Two people bound by different versions of the same fear. A sudden shout snapped their attention back. Near the front, a passenger was yelling. I want answers, the man screamed. You can't keep us in the dark. Others joined in. Voices rose. A few people stood ignoring crew instructions. Sarah's jaw tightened. This is it, she said. What? Daniel asked. Panic phase. A flight attendant tried to calm the crowd. Someone shoved him. Sarah stood. Daniel grabbed her arm. Sarah, don't. She looked at him, steady and sure. I need to slow this down, she said, or someone's going to get hurt. She stepped into the aisle and raised her voice, not shouting but commanding. Everyone sit down. Some did. Some didn't. The shouting man pointed at her. Who are you? Sarah didn't flash her badge. She did something better. She told the truth. My name is Sarah Miller, she said. I work in air security. And I promise you panic will make this worse. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, security. The man hesitated. Sarah held his gaze. Sit down. Let the crew do their jobs. After a tense second, the man sat. The cabin quieted. Daniel exhaled. Emily whispered, she's brave. Daniel nodded. Yeah, she really was. Sarah returned to her seat. That bought us time, she said. How much? Daniel asked. Not enough. She looked toward the cockpit again. I think, she said slowly, that the next move will involve the flight controls. Daniel's heart slammed. Can they do that? They can try. Daniel pulled Emily closer. Sarah, he said, voice tight, if things go bad, really bad, what do I do? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She studied Daniel's face, his posture, the way he shielded Emily without thinking. Finally, she said, "You do what you're already doing." "What's that?" "You protect your daughter and you don't let fear decide for you." Daniel nodded. He didn't know if that would be enough, but it was all he had. Up ahead, unseen by most of the passengers, the cockpit door handle shifted slightly. Not opening, testing. And in that small movement, the future of Flight 417 leaned toward chaos. Sarah noticed. Her fingers curled into a fist. "This isn't over," she whispered. Daniel felt it too, because deep down he knew something terrible was still coming, and whatever it was, it would force him to face the one thing he'd been running from since the night he lost his wife. The possibility that love might not be enough to save everyone. The diversion, the moment the captain said the word security issue resolved, the cabin didn't immediately relax. Relief came in layers. First, people stopped screaming. Then they started breathing again. Then they started talking, fast, shaky, emotional, like words could push the fear out of their bodies. Daniel stayed still, trying to keep his ribs from exploding every time he inhaled. Emily clung to him like he might disappear if she let go. Sarah remained crouched in the aisle, one knee on the carpet, one hand pressed against her side where she'd slammed into the service cart. Her face was calm, but Daniel noticed the small tells. The tightness around her eyes, the way she moved carefully, like pain, was a negotiation she refused to lose. A flight attendant appeared with zip ties. Another passenger, big guy, former military by the look of him, helped restrain the suspect. The man in the dark jacket was breathing hard, smiling like a person who still believed he'd won something. Sarah leaned close to his ear. "You're done," she whispered. The man chuckled. "Done? You think this ends when you break my toy?" Sarah's fingers tightened. "It ends when you hit the ground." His smile widened slightly. "You're landing right, good. That's what they wanted." Sarah froze for a fraction of a second. Daniel saw it from his seat. That wasn't fear. That was calculation, fast and urgent. She stood, ignoring the pain, and turned toward the cockpit. A flight attendant stepped in front of her. "Ma'am," the captain said. Sarah flashed her badge again. "I need to speak to him, now." The attendant hesitated, then moved aside. Sarah reached the cockpit door as it cracked open. The captain's eyes were wild but focused, like a man trying to control a storm with his hands. "What the hell is going on back there?" he demanded. Sarah kept her voice low and sharp. "We neutralized a controller device. But he's implying the diversion itself is part of the plan." The captain's jaw flexed. "Part of the plan how?" Sarah glanced back at the cabin. "Someone wanted us to divert," she said. "Which means the destination, this airport, might be compromised." The captain stared at her, then at his instruments. "We're low on fuel margin for continued holding. We have to land somewhere." "I know," Sarah said. "But we need to treat the landing like the second half of the attack." The captain swallowed. "Fine, we're diverting to Omaha, smaller, faster response." Sarah nodded once. "Good, lock cockpit procedures. No opening the door for anyone until we're on the ground and law enforcement is visible." The captain nodded. The cockpit door shut. Sarah turned back to the cabin, and that's when her eyes met Daniel's. He saw something in her expression that made his stomach tighten again. The danger wasn't over. It had only changed shape. Sarah walked back down the aisle, slower now, but still purposeful. She stopped beside Daniel's row, and Daniel could tell she was choosing her words carefully, like the wrong sentence could set off a chain reaction. "We're diverting," she said. Daniel nodded. "They said that." Sarah's gaze flicked to Emily, then back. "That means we're landing sooner." Emily lifted her head. "Are we safe now?" Sarah knelt, forcing a warm smile. "We're safer than we were 5 minutes ago." Emily frowned. "That's not a yes." Sarah's smile deepened slightly, real this time. "You're smart," Emily shrugged. "My mom said I am." Daniel's throat tightened. Sarah softened. "We're going to land, and then people with uniforms will help us." Emily nodded slowly, trusting her because she wanted to. Daniel leaned closer. "Sarah, what did he mean?" "That's what they wanted." "Who's they?" Sarah exhaled. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I can guess." Daniel watched her closely. "The device he had," she said, "was a cheap controller. It wasn't meant to crash us. It was meant to scare us, force a diversion." Daniel's ribs ached as he sat up slightly. "Why force a diversion?" Sarah looked around the cabin. Phones were out. People were recording, whispering, crying. "Because panic creates confusion," she said, "and confusion creates opportunity." Daniel felt cold. "Opportunity for what?" he asked. Sarah's eyes hardened. For someone to disappear. Or for someone to be taken. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He pulled Emily closer instinctively. Sarah noticed. "That's why," she added quickly, "I'm telling you now, when we land, you don't separate from Emily." "Not for a second," Daniel nodded. "I won't." Sarah's voice softened. "Good." Then she hesitated, like she wanted to say something else, something personal, but she pushed it down. Professional mask back on. The plane began its descent. The cabin crew walked the aisles, checking belts, repeating instructions. People listened this time. They'd seen what disobedience could cost. Through the window, Daniel saw darkness broken by scattered lights, small towns, lonely highways, the world going on like nothing was happening. Emily whispered, "Dad, are you hurt?" Daniel forced a smile. "Just a little, like when you fall at the playground." Emily touched his side carefully and winced. "That's not little." Daniel laughed quietly despite himself. "Okay, maybe medium." Emily looked at Sarah. "Are you hurt too?" Sarah nodded. "A little," Emily pouted. "Everyone keeps saying little." Sarah's eyes warmed. "Because if we say a lot, it gets scarier." Emily considered that. Then she said very seriously, "Okay, then I'm not scared a lot." Daniel's chest tightened with love and pain. He kissed the top of her head. "You're amazing, Em." Sarah watched them. Something unreadable passed across her face, like she was seeing a life she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. The plane shook once more, light turbulence. The suspect laughed from the front, restrained and guarded. Sarah's eyes snapped toward him. He said something low, only she could hear. Sarah's face went still. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he saw Sarah's reaction. He knew it wasn't good. Sarah turned back and walked toward Daniel again. This time, she didn't kneel. She sat in the empty seat behind Daniel's row for a moment, leaning forward. "He just told me something," she whispered. Daniel felt his pulse spike. "What?" Sarah's voice dropped even lower. "He said, tell the single dad I'm sorry." Daniel stared. "What?" Sarah watched his face. "He knows you." Daniel's mouth went dry. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Sarah asked. Daniel's mind flashed to 100 small things, how the man moved. How he didn't look surprised when Daniel blocked him. How he smiled like he'd expected Daniel to intervene. Daniel's hands started to shake. "No," he whispered. "No, I don't." Sarah touched his shoulder gently. "Daniel, look at me." He forced his eyes up. Sarah's gaze was steady. "Did you ever testify in court, against anyone, any case?" Daniel's heart thudded. 8 years ago, after the crash that killed his wife, he'd become obsessed with the investigation. He'd chased every rumor, every maintenance log, every whisper that it wasn't just an accident. He remembered one name, a technician, a contractor, a man who disappeared before questions could be asked. Daniel swallowed. I tried," he said. "But nothing stuck. The system moved on. They told me it was weather and failure and bad luck." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "And you accepted that?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "I didn't accept it. I buried it for my daughter." Sarah nodded slowly. "Sometimes burying something doesn't kill it. It just waits." Daniel stared forward, feeling like the cabin had shrunk. Emily didn't know any of this. He wanted to keep it that way, but the suspect knew, which meant this flight wasn't random. It had found him, or he had unknowingly walked into it. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, "we will be landing in approximately 10 minutes. People clapped nervously. Someone cried in relief. Daniel couldn't clap. He couldn't breathe right. Sarah looked toward the front again. Her jaw tightened. "This landing," she said quietly, "is going to be the most dangerous part." Daniel's eyes widened. "Why? Because if they wanted us to divert," she said, "then the ground is where the real plan happens." Daniel pulled Emily closer again, his ribs screaming. Emily looked up, confused. "Dad," Daniel forced a smile. "Just hugging you." Emily smiled back, trusting him completely. That trust felt like both a gift and a burden. The plane touched down hard. Tires screamed against the runway. The cabin erupted in applause, relief, gratitude, survival. But Sarah didn't clap. Her eyes locked on the windows. Outside, flashing lights appeared, airport vehicles, fire trucks, police cars. Good. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. A service van parked near the far edge, too close for comfort. No markings, no flashing lights, just sitting there like it belonged. Sarah leaned in to the flight attendant at the front. "Is that normal?" The attendant's face went pale. "No." Sarah's blood ran cold. She turned back toward Daniel. "Listen," she said urgently. "When they open the doors, you stay seated until you see uniformed officers at the top of the stairs. Real ones? Daniel nodded. Okay, and if anyone tries to rush the aisle, she continued, you don't move. Daniel swallowed. Sarah, what if they come inside? Sarah's expression hardened. Then, she said, you stay behind me. Daniel stared at her. Behind me? No one had offered him protection since his wife died. He'd been the protector ever since, alone, exhausted, always pretending he wasn't. He didn't know what to do with someone else taking that position. He didn't know how to trust it, but he wanted to, more than he wanted to admit. The plane slowed to a stop. Engines whined down. The cabin became quiet again, too quiet. Everyone waited. The captain spoke once more. Remain seated. Authorities are approaching. Sarah's eyes stayed fixed on the door. Daniel held Emily so tightly she whispered, Dad, you're squeezing. Sorry, he murmured. Then the front door mechanism clicked. And in that sound, Daniel heard the echo of 8 years ago, metal shifting, fate moving. Sarah stood, blocking the aisle, her shoulders squared, her calm returned like armor. The door began to open. Cold air rushed in. And somewhere outside, hidden in the darkness near the runway, someone was waiting for a single dad and his daughter to step off the plane.